And that, my friends, is how America was made great once again. Breaking at this hour, Jimmy Sengenberger is currently at the crossroads of politics and economics. Radio broadcaster master, now the celeb on the web. He's the smarty of the party. He's in cahoots with the grassroots. Jimmy at the Crossroads brings you thought-provoking commentary, hard-hitting interviews, original satire, and the best bumper music known to man. Jimmy at the Crossroads!
Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix, I said. Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix. I got Jimmy at the Crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. People want answers, they want to understand. They come to the crossroads and Jimmy gives them the plan. I said, gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix. I got Jimmy at the Crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. Come on, Jimmy, what you got?
Hello, my friends, and welcome to a Free to Choose Friday edition of Jimmy at the Crossroads. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner, and we are indeed feeling good on this Friday, revved up and ready to bring engaging, intelligent talk, Sang style, as we always do here at the Crossroads. And what a special edition do we have in store for you today. Now, it is Free to Choose Friday. I'll get to the lineup of guests we've got in just a moment. But why Free to Choose Friday? Well, the great late economist and freedom fighter, Milton Friedman, came out with a book. I think it was back in the 1960s. It's a seminal read called Free to Choose. And he did a television series in about 1980 or so that was given the same name. Here on this program, we believe human beings are and of right ought to be free to think, free to act, and free to choose. And as we like to do to kick off our Free to Choose Friday specials, let's take a look at how Milton Friedman started his Free to Choose episodes. And there you have it. It is Free to Choose Friday. Now, of course, Milton Friedman was an economist, and a lot of the shows that we do for Free to Choose Friday here on Jimmy at the Crossroads focus on individual liberty in the free market context, because free markets are essential to a free society. As Friedman was fond of pointing out, they are not sufficient for a free society, but free markets are essential for a free society. But there's so much more to being free. Free to think, free to act, and free to choose. And that includes freedom of speech. Freedom of speech is so critical, not just because in a democratic society, human beings should be able to criticize their government and hold them accountable without fear of repercussions. But it's also critical because it gives us the opportunity to suss through the issues of the day and conclude our own decisions, our own viewpoints after hearing different perspectives. Intellectual diversity, whether in media or in politics or, yes, on college campuses, is fundamental to a fully functioning society. That's why I am excited about our lineup today on Jimmy at the Crossroads. We will be joined to kick things off in just a matter of moments by Isabel Brown, who is a contributor at Turning Point USA and a 2019 graduate of Colorado State University. We're going to zero in on issues of free speech on college campuses, but also set the table for the broader discussion on free speech. Why is it important for young Americans especially to make a point of preserving and protecting freedom of speech and the engagement of ideas in America today? Then 2 leftist professors will join us for a debate on freedom of speech on college campuses, particularly when it comes to campus speakers. Now, I don't mean I'm going to argue against 2 leftists. They're going to argue against each other about whether or not there should be limits on who is allowed to come speak to campus as guest speakers. Professors Rob Margesson and David Dewberry will be joining me for that exact discussion. And then our capstone today on this free speech-focused Free to Choose Friday will be Dave Rubin, host of the highly popular podcast, The Rubin Report, and author of the new book, Don't Burn This Book. Looking forward to talking with him about a wide range of topics today here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. But first, let's get some words of wisdom in Cut 2 from Milton Friedman in an exchange, one of his speeches, where he was asked about the importance of free speech.
Aren't the people supposed to be intelligent enough to know deceit from truth?
No.
Very good.
They are supposed to be intelligent, they are supposed to be intelligent enough to choose among alternative purveyors of supposed truth. The problem is a one-sidedness. We believe the whole justification for free press, for free speech, for our whole system of adversary justice, the whole justification is that people will be best able to distinguish truth from falsity if they have an opportunity to hear a variety of different opinions. Now, if you only have one opinion spoken, to shift grounds, if we go to the Soviet Union, the people in the Soviet Union are enormously skeptical about what they hear from their government. But they cannot know the truth because they don't hear it. They have to conjecture what is the truth because they only hear one side. They don't believe that. Don't misunderstand me. They become experts at reading between the lines. But they still don't have access to the full variety of opinion which would enable them to choose and decide intelligently and reasonably about what's right. So let's by all means have a clash of opinion. Let different beliefs clash in the marketplace of ideas. But let's not have a monopoly or a subsidization of one brand of ideas versus another.
That gets to the core, I think, very well, of what freedom of speech is about. Again, it's not just about speaking your mind because you should, as a human being who's free to think, free to act, and free to choose who you listen to, what your opinions are, to speak your mind. But it's also so that you can listen to different ideas and then reason through them, but you need to be exposed to those ideas. And that's what today's Free to Choose Friday Free Speech Special is all about. In a matter of moments, we will kick things off with Isabel Brown and sort of set the table on the free speech issue. We've got the leftist professors debate and Dave Rubin coming up. It's Jimmy at the Crossroads. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner.
America's politics are crazy. The culture is in flux. That's why we work hard to help you keep up.
More politics, more culture, and more access.
We focus on the biggest stories of the day with some of the biggest names in politics and punditry.
Go to our website, WashingtonExaminer.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Do you suffer from feelings of entitlement, self-righteousness, and arrogance? Fits of resentment, anger, and hypocrisy? Terror that the world is going to end, or even worse, that the world isn't going to end and that things are going to get better. A deep need to point fingers, deflect or deny, uncontrollable stress, frustration or depression, fear of recession, fear of no recession, then you may have PTDS or President Trump Derangement Syndrome. Fortunately, there's new Magatol, the proven cure for PTDS. Just one Magatol a day realigns your sensibilities by bypassing erratic brain signals to amplify the logic receptors. Talk to your Obamacare doctor today to see if Magatol is right for you. Recommended dose of reality is at least once daily. Warning snowflakes. Side effects of Magatol may include optimism, hope for the future, good feelings about your country, accepting economic prosperity, renewed faith in capitalism, and admitting that things aren't so bad under Trump. If you discover you're allergic to common sense, stop use immediately and contact your doctor. Relax. Breathe. It's Magatol. From the makers of Triggerol.
And Crossroad fans, let's welcome back your host of Jimmy at the Crossroads, Jimmy Sengenberger.
Happy Free to Choose Friday. Welcome back to Jimmy at the Crossroads. I am Jimmy Sengenberger, your host for the program, coming in partnership with our friends at the Washington Examiner. Such a pleasure and a privilege to be with you today on an action-packed edition of the show that brings engaging, intelligent talk, Sang style, where we are focusing in on freedom of speech. Why? Because human beings are and of right ought to be free to think, free to act, and free to choose. And freedom of speech is essential to that. On college campuses, yes. In the media, yes. In the culture, yes. In politics, yes. We need to be able to speak our minds. So let's dive into this topic with our great lineup of guests today, starting with Isabel Brown, who is a 2019 graduate of Colorado State University. Of course, we're here broadcasting from Colorado with a degree in biomedical sciences and recently earned her master's degree at Georgetown University in biomedical sciences policy and advocacy after serving as a Turning Point USA chapter founder and president for 2 years at CSU, and as a TPUSA ambassador. Isabel recently became a Turning Point USA contributor to continue sharing this message, and Isabel joins us now. Welcome to Jimmy at the Crossroads. Happy Free to Choose Friday.
Hi there, Jimmy. Thank you so much for having me on today.
It is great to have you on the program. I saw you speak last summer at the Western Conservative Summit and gave an incredible address. So I want to set the table here because you're a recent graduate. I graduated from Regis University in Denver in 2011. I can tell you, while free speech was under attack back then, it was nothing like it is now, I think. Kind of give us a big picture view of what's going on. Let's start with college campuses, and then we'll get into why free speech is important in other areas of life.
Well, my run-in with the free speech police really began as a college student myself here in the beautiful state of Colorado. I had chosen to attend Colorado State University, the big cowboy school right up the road from where I grew up just outside of Denver, and never anticipated that I would be facing the very extreme political backlash associated with conservative beliefs throughout my 4 years at Colorado State University. I was having run-ins with inclusive language guides on what I was and wasn't allowed to say for my on-campus jobs. As a loud conservative activist with Turning Point USA, I often received threats of violence or death threats, and even had my personal apartment address posted online simply for wanting to bring diversity of thought to campus. So what I experienced as a college student really set the stage for what I do now as a spokesperson with Turning Point USA, being exposed to an all-out assault for free speech for all college students across the country.
So in terms of campus speech, I mean, why is it important to allow for the free expression of different ideas on campus as opposed to saying, hey, we need to make sure students feel comfortable and that they're not wanting to leave the campus at a given time because they don't like a particular speaker or fellow student's perspective?
That level of comfortability really is the issue and the main talking point when we're talking about this culture war that especially conservative students are fighting on their college campuses. Many students my own age and who identify as a millennial or Generation Z actually believe in regulating free speech if they consider it to be offensive. In fact, 41% of students believe that hate speech ought to be protected, and it's just a very alarming reality when we consider who gets to define what hate speech actually looks like. Ultimately, free speech is a cornerstone of the college experience, and what I've noticed more than anything in the last few years is that 18 or 19-year-olds are leaving their homes and going to their college campus, but maybe they have no political, religious, or value-based foundation at all. And so they set foot on their college campus for their first day of classes and blindly accept everything that the experts, who are their professors, shoving leftist indoctrination down their throat, will tell them as truth, because they don't know to question that reality. They don't know to stand up for their own beliefs or to understand really what the difference between conservatism or leftism even looks like to begin with.
And it can be intimidating, too, to be in a classroom and challenge a professor, especially if you don't feel like you know enough to put forward a strong argument against what they're saying. So that often can put a conservative student, I would say, at a disadvantage in a classroom. Now, I know from my own experience at Regis University, 2008, 2011, I did a campus radio show. That's how I got my start in media, and I was also an editor of the student newspaper and did a lot of opinion pieces for that. And I have talked with faculty and staff at least Regis University, and they have told me they don't think I could do the kinds of things that I did at Regis at that point in time. And I wonder, from your experience at CSU, Colorado State University, and also in interacting with campuses across the country for Turning Point USA, what you're noticing as far as whether something like what I did back then, which was a single-host conservative talk show where sometimes I would bring on speakers that were controversial at the time without screening them with the faculty or with the administration, if that could happen today.
I believe it could on particular campuses. And these days, when you talk about a conservative school, we're really talking about a very small handful of institutions. But what I have found through communicating with students, through interacting with people whose experiences were a lot like mine, and especially through producing my show On the Front Lines, which interviews conservative students about what it's like to experience that backlash and to fight for conservative values on their campus, what we're seeing is this indoctrination and the backlash and the extreme negativity and even violence propagated against conservative students is not just happening at the Ivy League schools or the UC Berkeleys of the world. These things are happening at Colorado State University, likely at Regis University here in Colorado. Some of the craziest stories I've heard were from the University of Nebraska or Texas State University. So we can no longer take for granted that a more conservative environment or a more conservative state automatically means an easier reality for conservative students on campus.
And so when you're on campus as a student, and you're facing this sort of intellectual adversity, shall we say, from being able to speak your mind, how do you recommend and encourage students to navigate those waters, given the sensitivities of college campuses these days? Isabel Brown.
Well, it can definitely be difficult. And when I talk to young people my own age or people experiencing this adversity on their college campus, I don't lie to them or I don't sugarcoat the reality of how difficult it might be to create a conservative community on your campus or to stand up to that intellectual adversity. Sometimes it just takes one person being willing to do something as simple as setting up a table or handing out a button to put on someone's backpack that says socialism sucks, to start a whole movement on a college campus and to start pushing back against that intellectual adversity to begin with. The advice that I usually give to our Turning Point USA activists is to start with something simple. Maybe start a club on your campus. Raise your hand in student government and say to your leftist peers that you disagree with the things that student government is spending student fee dollars on. Raise your hand in class and start to ask questions and unravel those false arguments that your professors are trying to make sure that you believe in class every day. Write a paper that actually shares your opinion and not just what you think the professor wants to hear. And when other conservative students who might not be as bold and as brave right away see you doing that, that's when you spur a movement on your campus.
asking questions, I think that's you said a lot of great things there, but I think the asking questions part is the best, especially if you feel more uncomfortable to speak out, because then you're not presenting a thorough argument and put on the spot to do a point counterpoint, but you're asking questions that may get not only the professor thinking about a response, but other students in the classroom thinking about what you're saying in contrast with what the professor's saying.
And the real problem with college campuses, Jimmy, is that we've created this culture that is so anti-free speech that conservative students feel the need to actually self-censor before they even ask a question or before they even say anything to begin with. 68% of current college students say that the current campus climate prevents them from even starting to express their true opinions for simple fear of offending their classmates or professors. And 83% of those students are conservative, and they agree that that area of self-censorship has been so strong on their college campus that they fear for even speaking up to begin with. And that's ultimately the root of the problem when it comes to restrictions of free speech on campus. We need to create an environment where intellectual diversity and questioning authority and looking for the truth and the answers of things in academia is restored. That used to be the entire epitome of the higher education experience. But unfortunately, many students feel afraid to even speak out to begin with today.
Yeah, that intellectual diversity piece, in fact, back in, what was it? I think it was fall of 2010, I had written a column for Regis University's Highlander newspaper in which I challenged Diversity Week. That was the buzzword at the time. Now you have more buzzwords, but that was the specific buzzword at the time. And I said at the end, I thought we should have more discussion about intellectual diversity because the free play of ideas is what's fundamental to a free society, and that includes listening to different ideas. We always love to play because it's free to choose Fridays, some clips of Milton Friedman. And I managed to find him talking a little bit about freedom of speech. I want to play cut 5 here, where he discusses the importance of listening to different ideas and what that means, why that is actually so significant. Again, Milton Friedman, I think this is in the 1990s.
What's important is not only freedom to speak, but freedom to listen. I don't think freedom to speak includes being subsidized by anybody. I don't believe it includes freedom to use government facilities like a hall to give a speech. What it includes is, on the one hand, the right to hire a hall, to say what you want, and second, and most important, not for the speaker, but for everybody else, the right of everybody else to listen, to hear what they want to hear. And what's happening now is not so much restriction on freedom of speech, but a restriction on freedom to listen. If a professor says something in a course that other people don't like, they come in and disrupt the course so that nobody can listen to him. The people who want to hear him can't hear him. And I think that's absolutely disgraceful. In fact, I think the most important single virtue, human virtue, is tolerance. And tolerance grows out of humility.
And I think Milton Friedman would say exactly the same about guest speakers or students if he were alive today. But the freedom to listen, even more important than the freedom just to speak, Isabel Brown. What did you make of that?
Well, tolerance, talk about a buzzword that should be very prominent on our college campuses that unfortunately has gone out the wayside in the past few years. Freedom of speech is about more than just being able to have the capacity to say whatever you want to say. It's having the maturity and the responsibility to expose yourself to different ideas that you might not have heard of in your own life, or you might not necessarily agree with up until that point in your life. As I mentioned, intellectual diversity used to be the cornerstone of the college experience, but we have told young Americans in the millennial generation and in Generation Z that they shouldn't be questioning anything, and they especially shouldn't be communicating with people that they disagree with. Those things should immediately be shut down. Those conversations shouldn't be happening, and therefore the freedom to listen simply doesn't exist on college campuses today.
Again, we're talking with Isabel Brown with Turning Point USA and host of the video series On the Front Lines, going on to college campuses and engaging and interacting with students. I want to broaden this discussion out because what happens when you graduate college is, theoretically, you go out into the real world and you actually have to engage in conversations with people, not just go to work, but also have mature discussions about important issues of the day. And you're not going to be sheltered in a safe space on a college campus any longer. So I'm curious what you would think about the point that I think is fundamental to this discussion, which is that by doing what we're doing on college campuses, you are ill-preparing young people today for going out into the real world to engage in the battle of ideas. And also what happens on college campuses can really help shape the broader society. And in that way, it can have a much more wide-scale impact that can be negative than just, oh, you can't speak your mind on college campuses or hear from a particular speaker.
Certainly, and college campuses really are the catalyst for the real world of the next generation, of Generation Z Americans, of, as we've seen with millennials who have graduated from college now and are in the quote-unquote real world. And I think it's interesting that you use that expression, because I hear that a lot, especially from older audiences that I'm lucky to communicate with at fundraisers or at conferences or speaking events. And I'm often told that I shouldn't be so concerned with what's happening on college campuses and with my peers being so intolerant to listen and to debate and engage in those intellectual conversations that accompany freedom of speech. But I usually push back on those people, saying, well, what happens when an entire generation of millennials or an entire generation of Generation Z enters the real world at the same time? And we've established a cultural norm of shutting down free speech, of intolerance to different ideas, of intolerance to having conversations to begin with. All of a sudden, the real world looks a lot like what our college campuses look like right now. And I'm very, very grateful to be a part of the fight to stop that at its root on college campuses before that becomes the catalyst of our real world with Turning Point USA. But we are seeing that to some degree today. You're seeing the AOCs of the world running for Congress and being elected and setting the cultural tone for the intolerance on our college campuses to spread throughout the real world.
I think that's so well put, and I couldn't agree more, Isabel Brown. But also, if you're leaving college without having had the capacity to critically think, to think clearly about issues, but also process different ideas, that is going to set you back out in the real world. And so anybody who thinks, oh, well, once you get out of college, you get in the real world and you'll suddenly have a rude awakening, I think is not understanding the dynamics of what's really happening on campuses and what the implications are moving forward in their lives.
Our universities are absolutely doing a disservice to America's next generations by prohibiting us to learn how to critically think, to learn how to engage with people who disagree with us. Look, the world is not a perfect stamp of one person after another with the exact same opinions, with the exact same worldview. And in America, that's actually a great thing in our society. We are one of the last countries on earth that actually allows for and promotes and encourages intellectual diversity to take place. And it's really what makes us the greatest nation on the face of the earth. And by prohibiting America's young people from engaging in that tradition and in that cultural aspect of who we are as a country, we won't look the same in the next few years or decades.
And as we wrap up our conversation with you, Isabel, let's talk about the broader issue of free speech in our culture. How do you handicap where things are at? I mean, obviously, college campuses are a very difficult place for freedom of speech right now. But we've got this broader cultural moment where you see woke activities and woke language on Twitter and social media, and you've got social media organizations that are trying to shut down certain conservative speakers at various times and what have you. Tell us a little bit about your thoughts on the critical nature of free speech in our overall culture and where things are at right now.
Well, critical is the best word to use to describe the situation where we are and the culture war that we really are fighting when it comes to having free speech allowed on every sort of public platform in our country. We think about free speech as allowing people to say whatever they want when they go outside their house or when they're standing in the middle of their city. But now that concept has actually evolved into the public platforms of today, of the 21st century, with our cell phones and our computers and the social media platforms that we can express ourselves in. And so we're facing this ideological question as a country and as a world of how do you balance that, allowing individuals to share their own beliefs and to share their privileges and their experiences that they've had living in the United States on social media when those big tech companies actually want to shut that speech down because, in their words, it spreads misinformation and it prevents actual dialogue from happening. Ironically, actually shutting down free speech on public platforms is preventing that dialogue. So I think the concept of free speech is much more broad than going out into the public square and saying what you want to say in person, but we have to examine the implications on our college campuses, on social media, when it comes to working from home home and working with technologies like Zoom that we've all been experiencing the last few months with COVID-19. And ultimately, it all comes down to the fact that all speech is free speech to some degree. And in America, we do have limitations on that when it comes to actually threatening someone's livelihood or safety. But educating America's next generation that, you know, some people are going to say things that you disagree with, and that's actually okay. But here's the tools that you can use to fight back against that.
It's okay for people to disagree with you, Isabel? I'm shocked and stunned that somebody who is under the age of 60 would say that right now. Isabel Brown.
I know. Blasphemy, right?
Exactly. Great to talk with you. Thanks so much for helping us kick things off today.
Thanks so much for having me, Jimmy.
And check out our show, On the Front Lines. Once again, Isabel Brown joining us here from Turning Point USA, here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. And in a matter of moments, what we're going to do is, this is going to be interesting. We're going to talk with two professors about whether or not there should be limitations on campus guest speakers. Now, these professors disagree with one another. Both leftists, both professors, both disagreeing, both free speech scholars. We're going to talk with Dr. Rob Margesson and Dr. Dave Dewberry coming up in just a few minutes here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, followed by Dave Rubin as our capstone. Keep it right here. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner.
Hey, this is Frankie.
Hey, and I'm Angelo. We're the owners of F&A Pizzeria. If you're looking for the best pizza in town, remember us, F&A.
Hey, we got the best crust.
F&A.
We got the best cheese.
F&A.
We got the best sauce.
F&A, man.
Put it all together, what do you got?
F&A.
Yeah, you got that right. F&A.
F&A Pizza on the corner of Hill Yeah Avenue and Dam Straight Street.
Fake cartoons. I'm gonna do the jumble. Who is it? What do you want?
It's me, Don Trump, Sir Elton John. I'm here to ask you a favor.
Oh my gosh, it's Captain Fantastic himself. So much glitter, so many sparkles, so bedazzled.
Well, thank you, Mr. President, I think. When referencing people in your speeches, could you please refrain from using my song titles?
Oh, you mean like when I called Kim Jong-un Rocket Man?
Yes, exactly like that.
Okay,
Yes,
from now on, he's Madman Across the Water. How would you like?
Well, you see, I have a problem with that because
How
it's the
about
same
if I
derogatory...
call Tulsi Gabbard the Island Girl?
I know Tulsi, and I don't think she
Ben
would...
Carson. Ben Carson is Honky Cat, that's all.
You can't call Ben Carson Honky Cat. That would be racist.
Why?
Ben Carson's black.
You know, I never noticed he was black at all. I never noticed that. It's funny that somebody like you, Elton John, would point that out to me.
Well, I don't...
All right, fine. From now on, he's Benny and the Jets.
Well, I suppose that's...
Benny and the Jets.
Yes, when Nancy Pelosi inevitably decides to have another round of impeachment, could you please refrain from saying the bitch is back?
It doesn't matter what she says. I'm still standing.
I suppose I'm just going to have to live with that. Fine. If you don't want to help, I'm out of here.
Go on, get out. Hit the yellow brick road so fast and hard. Get out.
Oh, and one more thing, Don Trump. The lyric goes, hold me closer, tiny dancer, not hold me close with tiny hands, sir. Thank you.
Go on, get him out of here. Get him out of here. Let's see. Rhymes with impeachment.
To Obamacare.
Pardon me.
Pardon me. Oh, hey, you must be Freddie May.
Frederick, please.
Yeah, whatever. Hey, listen, I'm Bill O'Goods with OSLAP. That's Obama's Student Loan Acceleration Program. And you just passed Obamacare, right? We're about to pass another bill to nationalize student loans. It's going to be a whole federal takeover.
Excuse me, sir. Could I get you a drink?
Yes, do you have a Lady Gaga?
Of course. One moment, please. How does this benefit SCALP, the Society of College Academics for Loan Proliferation?
Well, I'm glad you asked. More loans equals more money. That's more money for everybody. You could raise your tuition excrementally in perpetuity forever, and there's nothing they can do about it. You still got to go to school, right? You still got to get a loan. You ain't got no money. It's a win-win. Oh, and here's another thing. You can't discharge student debt by bankruptcy. You could have 3 student loans. You could go you can't declare bankruptcy on any of them. I don't care how much money you don't got.
But what about the students?
The who?
This.
Remember, my friend, here at OSLAP, we make money the old-fashioned way. We steal it from the students. This is for you.
So what you're saying is, this is a gold mine.
Indeed it is.
A gold mine.
A gold mine.
Stop! Let me tell you what's really going on with student loan debt today. You see, in 2010, President Barack Obama nationalized the student loan system, tying it to Obamacare. At that point in time, student loan debt across the country totaled $800 billion. Now, about a decade later, that number has doubled to $1.6 trillion. This is particularly because the federal government keeps giving out the loans, which has allowed colleges and universities to blithely increase their tuition without any concern. And the federal government just keeps giving out the loans because guess what? If your borrower is deeply indebted with student loan debt, you cannot discharge that debt in bankruptcy. You're stuck with it for life. That needs to change, particularly because there's no risk to the lender. That means the federal government can keep giving out loans, and also there's no risk to the colleges and universities. So they'll just keep raising tuition regardless. There really does need to be a congressional action done to address this student loan crisis in America. And at the Millennial Policy Center, we have some great extensive research on how to do this, including some bills working their way through Congress. So log on to millennialpolicycenter.org today to learn more.
Right on.
Well, it's going to be a pretty good decade. Freddie, let's have another.
Oh, let me just.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome back to the set Mr. Sang Style himself, Jimmy Sengenberger.
Rocking and rolling back on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Good to be with you in partnership with the Washington Examiner on a Free to Choose Friday, where we're getting into the subject of free speech and a fascinating discussion it is and will we have in just a moment. Good to be with you here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Free to Choose Friday, focusing in on free speech. And let's dive in with some points of disagreement here between two men on the left who join me today. Let's put him up on the screen. Nathan Matoush, working the Matoush magic. In the center there, we have Dr. Rob Margesson, who is chair of the communication department at Regis University, my alma mater, where he is also the director of the forensics debate program, and my good friend. Also joined by David Dewberry, who is a free speech scholar and an associate professor of communication at Rider University in New Jersey, and he joins us now as well. Gentlemen, good to have you on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. See, I knew we were going to talk over one another. It's always good to be on with you, Jimmy. Always good to talk to you.
Always great to talk with you as well. So let me have at it in this way first, because we were just talking with Isabel Brown of Turning Point USA, who goes on college campuses and interacts with conservatives who feel disenfranchised, shall we say, when it comes to campus speech. And I understand that from some of my experience and conversations I've had with Rob. And I want to throw this question to Rob first, which is, where do you view overall free speech as being at in terms of its current state of affairs on college campuses right now?
That's a broad question, Jimmy. Yeah, I mean, we've talked about it a bit in terms of Regis. You know, I think we're at a point where a lot of students feel, I don't think they value free speech too much right now. I was thinking about this morning. I rarely see acts of, at least open acts of free speech on my campus anymore. We don't really have student speakers that I can think of anymore. You know, not many student events or debates. So, you know, it seems, for at least for my campus, and David or Dr. Dewberry, whatever wants me to call him, or friend David, maybe he sees it on his campus, but I don't think I see any free speech right now. At least people aren't taking advantage of, students aren't taking advantage of the opportunity to speak freely on campus.
All right, and David Dewberry, what do you think? What is your assessment of the current state of affairs of free speech on campuses?
Speaking at my institution, I'm out here in central New Jersey. I would agree with Rob in the state at my specific institution. They're very similar, although we're miles and miles apart. We're both small private schools. You don't see many speakers on campus. There are some events and things like that on campus. You don't see those quote-unquote traditional speaking activities that you might used to see or expect from like 1960s Berkeley. But I think they're affected, and I think they realize that the students, that is, are affected by free speech issues that aren't necessarily the expression of views in your traditional public speaking, speaker on the corner standpoint. But, with technology issues, with the institution, banning some websites or restricting access or bandwidth or things of those kind of issues. So not necessarily those traditional things, but I think students, at least at my institution, kind of understand those things that most people might see on the periphery of free speech, but are definitely free speech issues nonetheless. Just up the road is Princeton University. Those students are typically, I would say, maybe a little more politically active, a little more politically involved than, say, students where I'm from. And I think you see incidences and specific speakers out there. And you could say that about other schools across the country too. I think it's just, the demographics of what the school attracts depends on the free speech issues you might see and how they address them.
That's interesting. So let's ask one more question to sort of help set the table, because I've had this conversation many a time with you, Dr. Rob Margesson, because we got to know each other when I was at Regis University. Never had you as a professor, but I did have you on my radio show a couple of times when I was doing a campus show. And we've had conversations, you and I, and also I've had conversations with students at Regis, where you've said point blank, you don't think I could do today the things that I did back then. Why do you say that, and how does that fit into the notion of speech on campuses today?
Yeah, I mean, we have talked about it. I think, the point I tend to go back to on this discussion is that, administrators are risk averse, and, even a show, and, I watch this show from time to time, and I did listen to your radio show and your local radio show here, so I guess I'm giving you a big plug here. When I watch you, there's nothing that you say I find, particularly offensive. I might not agree with your ideas, but I think administrators at universities at this point are so risk averse and so afraid that a student might get offended by something that, with which they disagree, that it's just easier to not put it out there, to say, we just won't have the show instead of having the show and having to deal with the pushback from student groups and faculty. It's easier to not allow the speech than to deal with the ramifications of the speech.
And Dave Dewberry, how do you assess what Rob just said, particularly about administration, and that maybe that's the driving force for why we see a lot of this idea that people can't speak their minds out on campus because they're concerned about some of the repercussions at the administration level? Do you agree with that?
I would say in my experience, I'm not an administrator myself. I can't speak to their viewpoints, just what I can kind of attribute to them. I do think that administrators have some concerns, especially at the institutions I've seen. I think they have that concern that Rob speaks to about offending, some students being offended and rather just kind of shut that down. But I think I've also seen those administrators be sensitive to the potential ramifications of silencing that speaker, say, on the right, and what that might bring about. So while you might offend some student on the left, you might censor some student on the right, and that's going to bring a backlash as well. It seems to me most school administrators want to be on the news for two reasons. One, for any good thing a student does, or two, any really great thing a professor does, like winning, the Nobel Prize or something like that. No institution wants to have itself in the media, in the news, saying that, students' speeches as being restricted or something like that. That just brings a whole wave of negative attention. A few years ago, a professor of ours, they were going to bring Chick-fil-A onto campus, and there was some backlash against that. And then so they reversed that decision, then there was backlash against that. And so it seems, you're in that double bind, and it's really a paralysis that the administration is. Either which way you go is going to be difficult, so sometimes it's best to just, put your shoulder into it and proceed as best you can and try to weather the storm, because there's no way you can stop it.
Can I speak to that really quick?
Yeah, go ahead, Rob.
I just think it's an issue of magnitude. I mean, I agree with David that they're afraid of pushback if they allow something, or they're afraid of pushback if they don't allow something. But in terms of conservative speakers and conservative students, there's so few, or at least so few on campus, that are willing to stand out on the quad and say, I'm conservative and I'm upset with this decision. So if they want to, if they have to choose, they'll upset the 4 or 5 conservative students who are willing to admit they're conservative, as opposed to, the 95% of the students on campus that are willing to identify as being on the left and being more vocal.
Sure.
So,
although the great
irony, and that assumes that distribution of students on the right and left at any institution.
Sure. Yeah, but also the great irony is, and we were talking about this in the last segment with Isabel Brown, and I know this, heck of a lot of conservatives on campuses who feel like they cannot and should not speak out, which means that they will not raise a stink over something like that. In fact, when I spoke to Rob's free speech class, a student did exactly that, came out as conservative. It was something. So I want to talk a little bit about an issue where you both disagree. So we've talked a little bit on what the administration is doing as far as their views, how they approach particular things of free speech. But let's talk about campus speakers in particular, because you're both advocates of free speech on campus in many different capacities, but one of you has a view that's more limited than the other in terms of what you would like to see or want to permit on college campuses as far as speakers. So I want to start with free speech scholar Dave Dewberry with this question, which is there a line you think should be drawn on guest speakers allowed onto college campuses because of controversial positions that they might take? And if so, where should that line be drawn? If not, why
not? To answer that question, I would say I am what they would call a free speech absolutist. I believe that the language in Congress shall make no law is pretty clear. No law means no law. Having said that, I don't necessarily interpret every word or piece of language in the First Amendment to be exactly what it means. But for me, the most logical position to take is to say there shall be no restrictions whatsoever on any speaker.
So you would allow for any student group, say Turning Point USA or other groups, to bring anybody onto the campus? At least as long as they're not doing anything violent and that kind of thing, I would assume.
Well, just to make things interesting, I would say the position is any group should be allowed to bring any speaker that they want. Now, I want to clarify just quickly to say, say if the students are paying for it, like a group like Turning Point USA, or if somebody's funding that, that's okay. I'm not necessarily saying that's a good economic or financial decision on behalf of the institution or anything like that. I'm just saying that any speaker is fair game in an educational environment.
All right, Dr. Rob Margesson, what say you on this question of drawing the line on speakers on campus?
I don't like how he's smiling already.
No, that's okay. No, I haven't talked to Dave in a while. It's great to hear him. Yeah, I mean, I think we have to acknowledge the fact that certain speakers bring with them to their speaking engagements reputations and beliefs, and oftentimes those reputations and those beliefs are seen by certain students and certain faculty members as I guess dangerous, not the word I want, but I'll use it. They're dangerous perspectives, and I think if students, if particular populations of students are able to effectively argue that bringing a particular speaker on campus will put them in a position where they are afraid to be on campus, then I think we have to take that argument seriously. And I know a lot of people are going to say, well, fear, they're only words, this is irrational. But, there are a lot of students who, there are a lot of speakers, let's say, who incite particular members of the campus community to engage in behavior that is dangerous and creates fear amongst particular members of the student body. So, I think if someone is coming on campus and advocating for particular perspectives that don't necessarily demand violence against a particular group, but incite people to the idea of, doing violent and dehumanizing acts against particular populations, I really think that has no place on a college campus.
So, Dave, I'll get to you in just one moment, but I want to ask Rob to give a few examples of some speakers that you might find to be inciting of particular student groups to the point where maybe they just shouldn't be welcomed onto campuses.
Well, we talked a little bit yesterday, Jimmy, and I mentioned Jordan Peterson, and your eyes lit up. So I'll go with Jordan Peterson. I think I'm out of the camera here. This is not my computer.
Just slide over a little bit, and you'll center yourself. Slide to your other side.
There we go.
There you go.
He's trying to move you from the left to the center.
That's it. Yeah, exactly. Good luck with that. Go ahead, Rob.
No, so, for example, I mentioned Jordan Peterson to you yesterday, and your eyes lit up. I mean, I think that's an example of a speaker who, if you look at his speeches and you look at his beliefs, they might seem, like those aren't dangerous. He's not advocating doing violence to particular, student populations or particular populations of people. But you also have to look at kind of who his following is and what he incites when he gives his speeches, right? He's kind of the darling of the incel movement, right? The students who, and who feel like they have a right to be misogynist on campus, who feel they have a right to attack people in the LGBTQ community, right? It's that those people's beliefs, that their very existence is somehow, problematic or an affront to, logic.
I'm going to jump in there so we don't get too off the rails. I will say that I have watched hours of Jordan Peterson interviews and lectures, and I get nothing of the sort. I think Jordan Peterson is one of the most deeply misunderstood people from the left, and who've been unwilling to give him enough of a listen. And Dave Rubin, who's coming up in the next segment, has been on tour with Jordan Peterson, at least was for quite some time, and I'll get him to speak to that. But I don't think that there's anything of the sort, and that's part of the problem, David Dewberry, is that I would fundamentally disagree with Rob's assessment there of Jordan Peterson, and therefore with the idea that even if you did, and I don't accept this premise and I want your thoughts on it, but even if you did accept this premise that we need to be cautious about speakers because they might get someone upset and incite them to some sort of activity because they don't like that particular speaker or feel comfortable with that particular speaker. I think on the screen we're seeing an example of Peterson apparently inciting somebody and now having responsibility for that person's interruption of the conversation. But even if we did accept that, I couldn't accept the terms as to why people are upset over a Jordan Peterson. But go ahead, David, please.
So I would say I have not wasted hours. I've maybe wasted minutes, understanding Jordan Peterson's kind of point. But I think I understand his point, where he's coming from. But that's aside from anything I would have to say. I have a few responses. I would have no problem with any institution inviting Jordan Peterson if they if they wanted to. I understand Rob's point that what he advocates could upset people, but I think we need to be cautious with the idea that just because somebody upsets somebody else, that thereby negates their ability to express themselves. I think there's other solutions that if you feel upset by what somebody is saying on campus, there's other ways to address that rather than censoring that person. You can certainly speak out. I'm hesitant to advocate for a heckler's veto where somebody in the audience tries to drown out the speaker. That's the same thing as censorship to me. But, counter events could very well be that. I know Jordan Peterson. He's very articulate, and he's been doing this for a while. He's got some age and experience on the average student, and I know that can be intimidating for a student to challenge somebody like that. But I also see plenty of videos of students challenging Jordan Peterson, as well as other speakers from the right. And I think that's the great thing that we see that kind of marketplace of ideas and accent, people challenging each other and debating them without resorting to censorship, either in official or unofficial ways. And so I certainly understand students can be upset by things, and I don't want to trivialize, how people's feelings are by when they encounter something. I mean, I could say something, like, well, I have to take a math test later, this week, and so that upsets me, so I shouldn't have to do that, right? That's not necessarily what we're talking about. But you can't have a person's, an audience member's reaction dictate whether somebody gets to express their views. My second response to this, and I'll keep this brief, is that these are, in a sense, the kind of people that you want on college campus. It shouldn't be a question of let's not have them on here. Instead, let's bring them to campus, because if you genuinely think they're wrong in their views and their opinions, you should help them get the correct views and opinions, not try to silence those.
I think that is a fundamental point here, Rob Margesson, is that the importance of free speech, we were talking about this earlier in the show, is not just about the ability for a speaker to express their views, but the freedom for young people to listen to views and then also to engage with those and help formulate stronger, better opinions. I mean, bad ideas, the best disinfectant, as our next guest Dave Rubin points out, the best disinfectant for a bad idea is a good counter-argument after you're exchanging ideas. And effective at it.
I want to go back, and I'll answer that, but I want to go back to one of the very first things you said, which is, how misunderstood Jordan Peterson's, perspective is. That's part of my argument, right? I'm kind of being couched as the guy who just wants to protect students' feelings. The people who misunderstand, it's not just the left who misunderstands its arguments. It's the the violent incel community who's associated with the right. I won't give you the incels to make you look bad, but they listen to his arguments. They come to those presentations, and they're the ones who create an environment on campus where students feel like they are not safe. I'm not saying students shouldn't hear things they disagree with. I'm saying we shouldn't bring people onto campuses who incite people to engage in oftentimes acts of violence, but also other degrading and dehumanizing acts because they feel empowered because their university supported this person.
Wait, Rob, hold on a second. One thing that's important, I think, to keep in mind here is that it's not, when you bring a Jordan Peterson and others to campus, it's not those people, the incels that manage to sneak into the group or whatever, that are causing violence or making people feel uncomfortable or trying to do anything that's interrupting or negative or harmful to people. It is those hecklers who are trying to have what Dave called the heckler's veto to shut down the speakers. We saw a B-roll a moment ago of one of those such interruptions, which does help to intimidate conservative students who already feel uncomfortable. And then a guest speaker they would like to come to campus is told, no, you can't, because some people might have their feelings hurt. Or in your argument too, you're saying that there might be some people who might get in there, which are far from the majority of people, maybe one or two, that show up at these things that might make somebody else feel uncomfortable. I mean, is that the standard we need to use in order to suppress speech? Real quick, Rob, and then we got to go to David.
My point is, it's not those people that leave that presentation and feel empowered to treat other people like crap, right? Sure, those people exist, but it's the people who are known to do acts of violence, who hear this and say, oh, I'm justified now in treating women as second-class citizens. I'm justified now in treating, LGBTQ students as second-class citizens because my university endorsed this speaker. That's what I'm concerned about.
All right, David Dewberry.
And I would say,
go ahead.
And I would say, I think Rob's getting to a big and an important distinction, which I think I would agree with in principle. Framing this argument, everyone should be invited to campus to speak who people think should be worthy of being invited. I understand Rob's point about the people who might come and see those speakers and how they might act on that. And I think that's the key word, how they act. Most, if not every institution has an anti-harassment, anti-discrimination policy that can be enacted against the students themselves. And while the students might create, Rob, I think you used language like that, like create a situation or something like that, even if it's within their speech, that can be addressed with by the institution. But I think it's important to hold those students who create that kind of harassing and discriminatory environment accountable for their actions. But I don't think we should put that to the speaker so much as it may seem.
Rob Margesson, your thoughts?
Well, David is advocating for the effectiveness of university administrators, which is something you don't hear many professors argue. Universities.
Well, students can also do that as well.
Yeah. Okay, but that once you're kind of saying, well, once this behavior already exists that has been incited by a particular speaker, we can deal with it, right? That's after the fact. Students have already been hurt by the people who act on this rhetoric. There's already a campus climate of fear as a result of those students acting on this rhetoric. And then you say, well, we could punish them afterwards. I'm just simply saying the universities should be at the front of this issue and not wait for for it to explode and then say we're going to expel a couple students who are harassing people.
And I can understand
harassment.
And I can understand that, but I would say to use the descriptions that we've been talking about, I'm willing to bet, and I'll bet you $5 that nobody goes to a Jordan Peterson lecture and comes out and says, you know what, I'm going to be an incel now. I think they had those kind of beliefs and ideas before they came in, and maybe felt reassured to express those publicly. Afterwards. That's as far as I'd be willing to say there. So if you're getting beforehand, I think it happens well before the speaker is invited or even considered to come on campus. Those students are already there with those beliefs.
Rob Margesson?
Yeah, but those beliefs are dormant, right? What you're telling me is someone who comes in and thinks those things but has never had the strength or motivation to act on those. And the example you use, the student goes in and says, I kind of think here's how I want to treat people. They go in and they see this speaker, and then they say, oh, wait, it's university, the stamp on this speaker and this behavior. And so, yeah, now I can act on it because I thought I was alone or I thought my beliefs were weird. But now I just got to see my university bring in a speaker who said, no, all these messed up thoughts I have that I want to act on, they're legit.
Well, that's as far as that's the extreme position I was willing to take. But I'm willing to bet most people that have that fundamental deep drive are already expressing those to some degree. It may exacerbate that, I'll give you that, but it may not. But I'm not willing to say that there was an on-off switch that happened with that speaker.
Let me just add something into this, which is that to the point on a certain individual comes to a speaker and feels that they have been reaffirmed in their beliefs. That doesn't mean that that speaker is actually reaffirming that person's beliefs. You can't control what one person is going to do or say or think as a consequence of an interpretation of a particular speaker, especially when I would argue that that speaker, that particular interpretation of that speaker is on the fringe and not the common interpretation that people who say, like Jordan Peterson, just as our example here, would point to. Rob?
Yeah, you can't predict that, but you can look at the past, right? You can look at speakers and see what happens on the campuses that they visited. You can look at speakers, and I know we're just hovering on Jordan Peterson, and that's fine because I don't want to try and box you into extreme corners. But we see example after example on college campuses of rises in violence against students of color when particular speakers or particular events happen on campus. We see rises in violence and discrimination against members of the LGBTQ student population when you have particular speakers and particular activities communities on campus. So I think any administrator or any student group or any faculty member that wants to bring a speaker on, they don't have to, predict the future when they have all of the information they need from the past about what happens when particular speakers come on campus. I think the university's responsibility, and my responsibility as a professor, one of them, is to protect my students. And if I think a speaker is going to create an atmosphere of violence and intolerance, then my job is to say, I don't want that speaker to come to this campus and create that environment. There is history. We can look at history. It's pretty easy.
Free speech scholar, fellow man of the left like Rob Margesson, David Dewberry. What's your thought on that?
I think, I do agree in principle with Rob. It's, our job to protect our students, but it's also our job to educate those students. And knowing that we only have average 4 years to work with these young people, once they get out into that quote unquote real world, there's no one there to protect them, right? And so I think one of the things that we need to do as educators at every level is not only to understand why another group gets to speak despite the consequences or the implications of whatever they're saying, but also how to understand and address and work through those arguments and opinions. I would love to live in a world where if everybody just thought the same thing as I do, we would get along swimmingly, but we live in a radical plurality. And I think part of this world that we live in terms of guest speakers and, inviting people over to our campuses to speak, that's something we have to face, not outside of the educational, safety of the university. And I think it's also our job to protect and prepare our students to deal with that once they exit.
Now, unfortunately, I have to run. We're out of time, but we ought to have you guys back for further discussion down the road. Always enjoy a good conversation with Regis University Professor Rob Margesson and David Dewberry. Haven't really had a conversation with you before, although we chatted yesterday. So great to have you on as well. Thanks so much for joining us, gentlemen.
Thanks for having us, Jimmy.
Thanks for having us.
And have a great weekend. Stay well and be healthy. Once again, doctors Rob Margesson, Regis University Professor, and David Dewberry, free speech scholar and a professor at Rider University in New Jersey, both joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. In just a few moments, we're going to be talking with Dave Rubin, who, of course, is the host of the Rubin Report and author of the new book, Don't Burn This Book. And I want to get his reaction to some of the things that were said, particularly what has he noticed about when he goes and speaks with Jordan Peterson, as he's done many times in the past. What is the response from the audience? Is there any indication that some people are being incited by what Jordan B. Peterson says? That's what we're going to be diving into, among other topics, including a little bit about his new book, again, Don't Burn This Book, here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner. It is Free to Choose Friday, and we are focusing in on a very important aspect of being a human being, which is freedom of speech. And as we've talked about as well, freedom to listen. Keep it here.
And now, the further future adventures of Starship Winkler. The captain finds himself up against a worthy adversary, a meteor maid.
Oh, come on. I was only in there 2 parsecs.
You can't double park here. You're in a twilight zone.
I didn't see the signpost up ahead.
Plus, your plates are expired.
Hold on. I've got an idea. This is not the double-parked starship you are looking for.
This is not the... Oh, come on, really? You're gonna try and pull mind tricks? What do I look like, a Gungan?
Misa thought it would work.
Here you go, Captain Schnook.
Ah, womp rats. A summons?
See you in court.
You mean I gotta come back all the way across the galaxy? Oh, look. This is right in the middle of Ponfar. And if I miss it, it's another 7 years.
Tough tribbles.
Well, was the captain really parked in a twilight zone? Will there be a twist ending? Tune in next time when we hear...
Look, maybe we can, work something out.
What do you have in mind?
A couple passes to the Space of Palooza Festival. Free parking.
I will see you in court. You will pay in full. Sign here, please.
You will see me in court. I will pay in full. I have signed here.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
What the... How does she do that? On Starship Winkler.
America's politics are crazy. The culture is in flux. That's why we work hard to help you keep up.
More politics, more culture, and more access.
We focus on the biggest stories of the day with some of the biggest names in politics and punditry.
Go to our website, WashingtonExaminer.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
We interrupt this program for a very important presidential message.
I'm Donald Trump. As you know, people of America, the elections are coming up in November, and I have some very distressing news for you. Very distressing and disturbing. Did you know that Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi are both porch pirates? Do you know what that is? There's hundreds of hours of video evidence of Nancy Pelosi coming up on your porches and jujitsuing your precious packages. Well, Chuck Schumer waits in the street in the getaway van because he's too afraid to be a man and do his own dirty work. She has to do the dirty work just like she always does. Remember that this November when you go to vote, a Republican would never do that. He'd never take your precious little tot's choice. Never. And so think of that when you vote this November. Thank you very much. God bless and have a great day.
Breaking at this hour, Jimmy Sengenberger is currently at the crossroads of politics and economics.
Certainly we want to be safe. We want our fellow citizens to be safe. But there is never a time to short-skirt the Bill of Rights.
I got Jimmy at the crossroads, making sense out of nonsense.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, for the final segment of Jimmy at the Crossroads, our special edition Free to Choose Friday. Here's Jimmy Sengenberger.
Welcome back to Jimmy at the Crossroads here on a Free to Choose Friday. Coming to you, of course, in partnership with the Washington Examiner. And sometimes when you're feeling good on a Friday, you just want to whip out one of your harmonicas and play a little bit. Such a pleasure and a privilege to be with you today, as always. Thanks for joining us, being a part of the program. If you have not subscribed to the YouTube channel, be sure to do so. But I wanted to play a little bit of harmonica to introduce our very special guest today, who, according to Twitter, is in quarantine or something in the Dagobah system. Dave Rubin is host of the Rubin Report and also of the new book, Don't Burn This Book, which we're going to put on the screen. Don't burn that book. Buy it instead. Dave Rubin, happy Free to Choose Friday on a day focused on free speech. Welcome to the show. So great to have you.
Jimmy, it's good to be with you. I wish I had a harmonica. I think I've got one around here somewhere, like buried deep, but you've got some skills, man. I'm impressed.
Well, thank you. I got 6 others right here, just so you know.
Wow.
So I am a legit harp player. So how you doing, sir?
Wait, one other thing on the harmonica. What do they call that? A harmonica case. Does it have a
Yes.
special name, or do they just call it a harmonica case?
So it's a harmonica case. It's no special name, and there are 7 different keys in there. This was a D harmonica. I was playing in the key of A, because circle of fifths, if you know anything about music, A is the 5th of D, and I play second position cross harp. I just thought I'd confuse you for a moment, Dave.
I was told there'd be no math here, so I'm not really sure what you're talking about.
We can move on, because I don't think that math was. I didn't think math was your specialty. So
No.
we could talk about speech instead. Yeah, we had a striking debate in the last segment. I had 2 leftist professors on, and they have a different view on whether or not we should allow guest speakers onto campus, campuses across the country that are very controversial. And Jordan Peterson was one speaker that the professor who argued for a higher standard, saying we should limit guest speakers onto campus, that he thought should not be allowed to campus, particularly because there might be some in the audience who would be incited by Peterson on either side, but especially those who, you know, in the incel community or that kind of thing. What do you make of that as somebody who has toured with and gotten to know very well Jordan Peterson?
Well, with all due respect to your previous guests, especially if they are professors at universities, they might want to think about getting into a new line of work. I mean, just quickly on the Peterson front personally, I spent a year and a half touring with this guy. We did about 120 stops in about 20 countries. He gave a different lecture every night, a different hour-and-a-half lecture. I mean, try to think of just the intellectual acumen you need to do that in and of itself. Most people just give the same speech over and over and over ad nauseum. The guy never said a bigoted word, never said a racist word, never said a homophobic or transphobic word. His entire message is about empowering you as the individual to make the responsible choices in your life so that you can flourish, so that your family can flourish, your community, and then, you know, we can build up from there. The idea that someone who's a professor at a university, even if you found Jordan's ideas to be odious or nefarious or scary or some other good adjective, you would still want him to speak. Or at the very least, you would say, if he's invited to speak by an accredited group at the university, that he should have the right to speak. It doesn't mean you want everyone to speak at your university. If this was 1939, I wouldn't want Hitler to come to the university. However, if a group invited Hitler, then you would let him speak and you would counter it with good speech. The fact that this thing has let its tentacles loose to the point that university professors find it okay to try to deplatform speakers is so dangerous. And by the way, you know, I always say this thing about how quote unquote journalists are destroying journalism. Well, it's academics who are destroying academia. So they're the ones that are, you know, taking the system down. They're blowing up the Death Star from the inside.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's well put. What I would say is, because Rob Margesson was the professor who was arguing Peterson shouldn't come on campus. He's a good man. He's a good friend of mine. But the idea
did he say anything? Did he say anything specific?
No.
That Jordan has said?
No. And then nobody ever does. Nobody ever does.
Yeah.
Now, let me ask you a question relative to this, because his argument was, there might be people in the audience who have certain radical beliefs that will be reaffirmed by Jordan Peterson. What is the audience reaction, not from the hecklers that try to interrupt from time to time, but from people who were there to learn and to listen? Because I've listened to many hours of Jordan Peterson lectures and interviews, and that's not the sense that I get, that there are radicals amidst him that are getting some reinforced extreme views.
Right. Well, it's interesting that he didn't have a specific example of something Jordan said, because they never do. They'll say he's a transphobe, and you say, well, wait a minute, I toured with him, I met trans people there, they seem to enjoy it, and he never said a word. He didn't want anything bad to happen to trans people. He wants them to be treated with the same rights and dignity as everyone else. He just doesn't want the government to compel your speech related to what pronouns you have to use when referring to a trans person. But the point is, if you treat him with respect, he'll treat you with respect. That's the social contract that we all abide by in a free country. We don't want the government telling us what to say. You know, I saw Jordan get people off drugs. I saw Jordan reunite families. I saw him just get better jobs. Like the litany of things that we all go through in life, the struggles that we all go through, there isn't one example that he didn't help someone in that specific case. There was one night we got to the end of the show in Dublin, in Ireland, and we walk out the side into a little alleyway. You know, you walk out the artist's entrance, and there's two men standing about 20 feet away. One's about 60, the other one's probably about 25. And they're hugging and they're both crying. And they come right up to us. And it turns out that it was a father and son who had had a falling out about 5 years before, who then independently both bought the book, 12 Rules for Life, and then came to the show. They saw each other at the show and they made amends there. I mean, try to imagine something more powerful than that. That was the message that the guy was sharing. And then, you know, I would say these are faux academics. I don't know this specific person that you had on, But these people that are afraid of ideas and have the gall to say that they're the ones that are supposed to be teaching young minds. You know, in college, you're supposed to learn how to think, not necessarily what to think. Yeah. And they're robbing them of that. But as I said before, I mean, this is why academia is crumbling, and coronavirus has just exacerbated that. Why would you go into $150,000 in debt to learn from a bunch of people that are afraid of ideas? Doesn't really make any sense.
Well, Dave Rubin, in your book, and I've heard you say this before, but in your book, Don't Burn This Book, you say that free speech is the best disinfectant for bad ideas. And I think that's fundamental to what we're talking about here.
Well, absolutely. If you were to say something truly racist right now, or you were to say something, you know, using any of these buzzwords, homophobic or transphobic or Islamophobic or whatever it might be, I could then counter that with some sense and some logic, using reason, as humans do with our brains. That's what separates us from the animals. But the idea that I would stop you from being able to speak is crazy. And, you know, we have a much bigger problem, as you're well aware, when this is related to big tech, because we don't know how they're manipulating us, what they're taking down, what they're not letting us say. Just in the last couple of weeks, YouTube said that if you put up information that is counter to the WHO, the World Health Organization, that they're going to take down the videos. Now, the World Health Organization, they're a health organization. Okay, that's right. That doesn't mean they get everything right. Why should you not be able to criticize or counter their ideas? Let's not forget, it was only a few weeks ago that they were telling us not to wear masks. Now they're telling us to wear masks. So do we have to take down their old videos when they were countering what they now purport to believe? I mean, we have major, major problems. You know, people think that the free speech battle is just about the government coming for your free speech. And of course, that's the beautiful protection that we have with the First Amendment in the United States, which, by the way, for all these people that tell us how, you know, the rest of the world is laughing at the United States because of Donald Trump, it's like, come on, everybody, and in every country I went to, people wish they had the protections that we have. So we have a big free speech problem, and I'm not even that concerned about it from the government yet. What I'm more concerned is we're doing it to ourselves, and then the big tech element. The government part always lurks behind all that, of course, but that's actually not the big fight right now.
Now, I've heard you, Dave Rubin, talk about big tech before, and here's the rub for me. And it is a difficult situation in a lot of ways, because we do see censorship of a variety of different, more conservative speakers or viewpoints, different narratives than what the media is trying to spin, WHO politicians in regards to coronavirus, as you've pointed out. But at the same time, Facebook and Twitter, we may need them for the roles we play in media, but you don't need to be a part of that. And technically speaking, Facebook can't force you in any way to use its products or services, whereas the government has the power of force. So there's this big question about how we regulate or don't regulate big tech. And I'm of the mind that government shouldn't get involved, because I think that would cause even more problems. And what needs to happen is we need to speak up more and more pronounced and get people lined up together against Facebook and Twitter when they do, or YouTube when they do these sorts of censorship things, as opposed to, as some are suggesting, looking towards regulating big tech more. What do you think of that?
You're speaking my language, man. Yeah, this is where I come on the more libertarian side of the argument. I don't believe that you take one big thing, big tech, and then you combine it with this other thing, big government, and then think that that will make things smaller. What that will do is combine them into some sort of giant Voltron or Transformer Devastator-like monster. Did you get the reference there?
I did indeed.
You did. I thought you would. You look like you're at the right age to get the reference. So I don't believe in that. I believe in human ingenuity. I believe in competition. I believe in individuals standing up. So yes, is it scary that YouTube and Twitter and Facebook have this kind of power over us? Of course it is. But you know what? These things didn't always exist, and they won't always exist. David beat Goliath. The little guy can beat the big guy. As you may have heard, I started a tech company, locals.com, and we're building digital homes for creators where you own all of your stuff. We don't own user data. You set your rules. And I think we're solving about 95% of problems for 95% of the creators. And just yesterday, Donald Trump Jr., you may have heard of that guy, he announced that he's going to be using our platform. So I think things can change. And the knee-jerk response to just say, hey, we got a problem, let government fix it. It's like, well, you know, government causes most of the problem. So most likely they're not going to solve most of the problem.
Many times already on this program, I have played Ronald Reagan's statement that government is not the solution to our problems. Government is the problem, because it's so true. But you look at big tech. I mean, I remember when Mark Zuckerberg, just a couple of years ago now, I mean, I guess it was a couple of years ago, although it seems more recent than that, he testified before the United States Congress, and he was asked a question about whether or not he would support regulation of big tech. And he said if it's the right regulation, and then Senator Lindsey Graham asked him, would you help us write regulations? And he said, sure, I'll help you. Big tech wants more regulation because they know they can have a seat at the table in order to push out little guys and like locals.com in order to increase their power relative to the market.
Well, not only do they want it because it will help crush competition, right? Because then the government will be off their back. But they also want it because then the government, then there's this strange line where it's like, instead of the government censoring you, well, it'll be the company censoring you, but the government will have something to do with the company. I mean, all of these people, you know, when AOC and the rest of the progressives, they demand that Facebook, you know, censor hate speech and censor all these things, it's like, wait a minute. You know, hate speech, we're allowed to say hate speech. The Supreme Court ruled on that. There's no such thing as hate speech. You can't call for direct violence for people, but you're allowed to say bad things. That is part of what free speech is. Actually, it's a necessary part, because how do you decide what is right and what is okay and what is acceptable and what isn't? So once the government, once AOC says, no, Facebook, you have to do this, well, congratulations. That is a major infringement on our First Amendment rights. And I think a lot of people are waking up to this stuff. I mean, I think one of the side effects, the positive side effects, let's say, of coronavirus is that people are waking up. They're going, wait a minute. Why does the government have so much to do with my life? Name three. If you say to anybody, you could say to the furthest lefty socialist Bernie Bananas loon on Twitter, if you say to them, name three politicians you like, they can't do it. They'll say Bernie, AOC, and then, you know, maybe picks another. But the point is, nobody can pick three they like. Even the people who love Trump the most, they don't love him because he's a politician. They love him because he's not a politician. So the idea that these people that we've just decided to give power to have any clue what's going on. I mean, that Gavin Newsom, my governor here in California, who was the former mayor of San Francisco, who turned it into literally a crap hole. There's an app to tell you where human poop is on the street in San Francisco. I'm pretty sure that this is not the guy that should be ruling my life in California right now, which maybe says more about me, why I'm here. I'm not sure, but you know, we used to be able to go to the beaches, so that was nice.
Well, I'll tell you, Colorado is becoming increasingly Californicated, and that's where I'm broadcasting from. So, I mean, yeah, it would be nice. Maybe you can help us ward off some of the left-wing stuff that's been coming from California by moving here. You'd be the right kind of Californian to move to Colorado, but you might not want to come here, to be honest with you, because more parts of the country.
I got my own problems over here, man.
I know full well. I watch your show. You have a tremendous amount of problems, Dave Rubin. Dave Rubin hosts the Rubin Report. Let's talk about what's going on with coronavirus for just one moment, especially on the free speech side. But look, I know that you are a Revenge of the Sith fan, Star Wars Revenge of the Sith. And this has been in my mind because I think this is the nature, this is the way that government is right now. It reminds me of a particular scene in Revenge of the Sith.
In order to ensure the security and continuing stability, the Republic will be reorganized into the first galactic empire for a safe and secure society.
For a safe and secure society, that sounds like what the argument is behind suppressing some of the speech on countervailing narratives in this coronavirus crisis and the science. That sounds like so many things that are happening in our society today, Dave Rubin.
Jimmy, can I tell you that I've done about 200 shows in the last 3 weeks for this book tour? This has been by far my favorite interview. The fact that you just played a clip from Revenge of the Sith, I have to insert Star Wars references.
The force is
normally.
strong with me. Dave, the force is strong with me.
Indeed it is. Well, look, I've been saying to people for years that the prequels will be looked back on much more fondly. Yes, the acting is stiff. Hayden Christensen's a terrible actor, and some of the dialogue and the love scenes are stiff. But the general idea of a person creating conflict to consistently build power, which is exactly what first Senator Palpatine did, and then Chancellor Palpatine, and then ultimately Supreme Leader Palpatine. That's exactly what he did. And what was he doing the entire time? The more, that scene right there, that's it. And then everyone will cheer you along as you're telling them that you're going to keep them safe from the thing that you created. So I'm not saying that our government created the coronavirus, but they create a response that is so over the top that suddenly every time they do something, we applaud them for it. So you got people in California where virtually nobody is sick, and certainly young people are healthy, and it's 85 and sunny every day, and they're telling us we can't go to the beach, and we're all like, oh, good, we can't go to the beach anymore. Well, why am I paying 13% property taxes? So the point is, we need Jedi. We need more Jedi. You know, they're scattered across the galaxy. You know, another reference that I'm sure you've heard me make is that what the progressives did to the liberals was basically execute Order 66. The progressives moved into the liberals. The liberals didn't realize it because liberals are nice and liberals are tolerant and decent. And they just executed all of them. And I would say there's a couple good liberals spread throughout the galaxy, which is why I say I'm on Dagobah. And I would say Bill Maher's there. And Bill Maher's an interesting character because who hates Bill Maher now? It's the left. Who loves Bill Maher now? It's the right. I mean, everything is completely upside down right now. And, you know, I am a believer that the little guy can beat the big guy. So if Luke blew up the Death Star and all of these things can happen, then we can fix this problem, but it ain't going to be easy.
The only quibble I would have is that the Jedi failed to foresee the rise of the Empire. And so having more Jedi may not have made much of a difference. Instead, we need a resurgence of the Jedi, shall we say, because that did make the difference with Luke.
You are making Luke Skywalker's argument in The Last Jedi, which was a horrific movie, and I'd like to have, you know, I could do a whole show. It was horrible, and it decimated so much of the lore of Star Wars. But you are right that at the height of their power, and this is exactly what Luke says, I mean, it's the only line in the whole thing that makes sense. At the height of their power, they didn't realize that this thing was coming. And in many ways, that is a parable to what's happening today. You know, if you live in the West right now, but specifically in the United States, let's just put aside coronavirus specifically for a second because of the amount of unemployment right now. But just look at us 2 months ago. The unprecedented success, unprecedented wealth, unprecedented freedom across the board, all of the good things that the West and capitalism has brought upon us. And then at the same time, then coronavirus sneaks in and we didn't see it coming, that the authoritarians would take advantage of it. So it does, you know, I don't like Last Jedi, but I can work this analogy here.
Okay, so as a Star Wars movie, Last Jedi was not up to par. I just find it entertaining. That's what I mean by okay. Like, I can sit through and watch the movie, and I'm entertained, but I'm also judging it a good bit. So I think there's a balance that can be struck.
Why is Luke projecting himself as a Force ghost to fight Kylo if he's going to die anyway? Just show up, man.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. That's a very fair point.
He can't fly an X-Wing anymore? I mean, just freaking fly over to the Salt Planet, do your thing, and dip out. I mean, come on.
Dave Rubin, we need to have you back for a full discussion on all 11 Star Wars movies and just go through piece by piece by piece. And I'll even play a little more harmonica for you at that point in time, too.
Fine, but I'm not going to talk about Solo, that trash.
Now, I actually liked that. I thought that was pretty good. I thought that was good. We got to have a more conversation. I mean, we are agreeing a heck of a lot on the ideas of free speech and liberty and individual rights, but I guess there are a few differences when it comes to, but we're both fans. I mean,
as General Grievous said to Obi-Wan Kenobi, time to abandon ship.
Yeah, absolutely. Good luck. Dave Rubin, author of the book. Let's put it up on the screen one more time before he abandoned ship. Don't burn this book. It's a good read. One thing I have to say I really like about it, Dave, is that you captured your voice very well. I mean, it's not easy when you're doing writing. I write columns and articles. It's not always easy to capture your voice in writing, and I think you did a good job there. Thanks so much for joining us today on Jimmy at the Crossroads. This was a blast.
May the Force be with you.
And I'm Catholic, and with your spirit. Dave Rubin, thanks for joining us, sir. Good to have you.
See you, Jimmy.
Thank you. Check out his book, Don't Burn This Book, on sale now. It's a great read. Very interesting. He delves into a lot of different topics. And on the subject, I mean, we got off from free speech a little bit, but on the subject of free speech, he's right on that the best disinfectant for bad ideas is free speech. It is the ability to listen to and engage with different ideas. And that's what we're seeing suppressed in our society today, and far, far too often. We need to have this resurgence of liberty. I guess it's the Jedi coming back in the form of Luke to blow up the Death Star, the second Death Star, and defeat the Emperor. That's what we need in our society. It seems like almost this is post-Order 66, and we're now at a point where the Rebel Alliance is trying to do battle and have a resurgence and to restore liberty. And that's what we all need to do when it comes to freedom of speech. That is it for us today on this Free to Choose Friday. My thanks to Isabel Brown, Professors Rob Margesson and David Dewberry, and of course Dave Rubin, host of the Rubin Report, joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Such a pleasure and a privilege to be with you today. Have a great weekend, stay well and healthy, and tomorrow night, Jimmy Sengenberger's show will be broadcasting live 5 to 8 p.m. Mountain Time on News Talk 710 KNUS. Be sure to tune in. Once again, enjoy your weekend, and may God bless America.